Hello, my name is Protik Mukhopadhyay. I'm an entrepreneur and an author. I'll be hosting the Reimagine Sales Systems podcast, where I'll be bringing some of the industry thought leaders who will be sharing their go-to-market strategies for their business systems. Welcome everyone for today's podcast. Today I'm really lucky to welcome Jalal Iftikhar. He's the Global Director of Business Systems at Intercom. Thank you, Jalal, for joining us.
Hi, Protik. Nice to join as well. I'm happy to be on board.
Thank you. So, Jalal, if you can share a little bit about your personal journey in the enterprise world, how did you get into this role to be the global leader for the Business Systems Intercom? That'll be really helpful for our listeners.
Yeah, I had an interesting journey. I started off as an engineer. This is a while back. I finished my degree in computer science and business admin. I always had this intrigue about me of mixing business systems and our business processes with engineering principles. So that's why I kind of took that double degree. But once I graduated, I went to an engineering. I had an engineering job for 5 years at McAfee. Worked there nonstop. Did a lot of R&D. But I think in the back of my head, I was still could not remove that itch. So I joined another startup after that. I went to pure engineering at that point, and I realized my passion wasn't developing products. It was more around developing solutions to help the business itself. So I'll give you an example. At that point, I interacted with Jira. I interacted with what I knew at that point was Salesforce, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. How do I mix the two together? How do I blend them? How do I get the systems running? And then over the next 2-3 weeks period, I realized I spent more time configuring Jira, Salesforce, and building up my own automation framework to kind of make sure everything runs smoothly. And the more I got into it, the more I was intrigued. And this is while I was in Canada. And then I had an opportunity to come to work at Intel in Santa Clara, maybe 8-10 years back. And I took that. That was a field application engineering role. So still not business systems yet, but I was starting to kind of head one towards the mecca of tech, which is San Francisco. And two, I'm starting to get more into the business side of things now while dealing with clients. I did that for 2 odd years, and I realized this still isn't my jam, so to speak. So then I joined another startup, ShareThrough. That's when my exposure really kicked into a high gear. I came in, the CTO at that time was like, hey, I know our processes aren't great. I know our systems aren't great. Let's figure this out. I spent the next 4 or 5 years there, building their systems out, building their sales ops teams out. And that's where it all clicked for me. It clicked for me from a perspective of how processes, how business systems, how people all interact in running a company. And that just became my passion from that point onwards. Did that, moved to another company for a couple of years. And after that, I joined Intercom here. As companies evolve, I think the business side or teams become more specific to what they think. So I kind of moved towards the business system side of things because that's where my engineering degree kind of kicked back in again. Plus the acumen that I had collected over the past 6-7 years of how businesses are run, use that to, not my advantage, but use that to kind of make sure our business systems are operating to really empower our stakeholders. Because I don't build a product for my ego, so to speak. Like my only goal is, can this system perform well, or can this engine in certain aspects perform well for our stakeholders? If the answer is yes, then I'm doing a good job. Now, if the engine is also well equipped to handle the future loads of the future of next year and the year after, then I'm doing a really great job. Easier said than done, but that's been my journey. I've gone through engineering, I've gone through sales, sales engineering. I've almost handled any role, but what really stuck with me was business systems and the processes that evolve around it.
That's a really interesting journey. Thank you, Jalal, for sharing that. In terms of Intercom, I think it's a very famous brand, and I think not just startups, but very large companies use it. So can you share a little bit about your company's go-to-market strategy, and then the part 2 is how does you and your team enable that sales motion?
Yeah, I think there's no hidden secret, but for the longest time, I think our strategy was not inbound, but self-serve. We wanted people to come in, install the app, set it up themselves, and move forward. But now, over the last 2-3 years, we've made a pretty distinct call of making sure our sales-led businesses, we raise a flag on that. We go through outbound motions. We want to make sure we start to go more and more upmarket as we proceed, to making sure we are starting to become a bigger brand, not just with the folks around the world, but with the bigger companies and with the bigger, I would call it the enterprise client. So as we start to shift that angle, our systems need to kind of shift as well accordingly. A self-serve business and a self-serve motion is very, very vastly different through a sales-led motion. The systems for the last 5 years have been geared towards making sure our self-serve business is running effectively, and we can bill as effectively as possible. But doing that shift to self-serve to sales-led motion is completely different. You need to make sure your market instance can handle those two different flows. Your Salesforce systems can handle those flows as well, and then you're billing in your financial systems as well. So that's been the journey that we've been trying to make over the last 2.5 years.
Thank you, Jalal. In terms of outside the self-serve, do you have like a large Salesforce team that goes to market, or is it a small team? Is there a channel play here in your company?
So yeah, no, we have a full-on sales-led business, which is
Okay.
200 odd people.
Okay.
All kind of powering that, and the motion has shifted, right? Maybe 3 years back, if you asked me that question, it would be vastly different.
Right.
But over the last 2 years or so, we've made a massive push in moving more and more things towards sales-led, growing our sales-led business and our sales-led teams. So yeah, it's become a pretty pivotal part to our business.
Thank you. So now coming back to some specifics around projects and priorities. So are there any projects that either were completed recently or you're planning this year that you can share? And also some of the lessons learned or some of the best practices that you hope to leverage as you're looking at some of these projects?
Yeah, the biggest project we're about to finish off is CPQ. As I said, because we're moving to sales-led motion, CPQ becomes an integral part in how we sell, how do we configure everything for our sales-led, how do we help automate that side of the business for our sales team as well. So we started that, 1.5 years back, the journey. We kind of split it up into two aspects. We started off with just enabling CPQ for new business. To kind of understand how CPQ runs, it's a smoother transition for us as well. New business is usually not that data heavy. So all the changes that you can make, it flows through the end-to-end system pretty seamlessly in certain aspects. We did that for 6 months, 8 months. We've gotten consultants to help us out as well during that time, but we also had internal TPMs and an own internal CPQ dedicated team, which not only involves the sales systems team, but it also involved our billing team and our financial team as well, to making sure any changes that we make, at least in Salesforce, reflects properly in the downstream systems, because that was one of the bigger, not aha moments, but that was one of the challenges that we had, is making sure our upstream and downstream dependencies, even though we at that point reported into different teams, they work as seamlessly as possible, because it isn't good enough to just go, yep, our CPQ instance and let's say our CRM is working really well, that's a Salesforce. But when it comes down to billing or our billing system, our financial system, it's their problem. We took an approach of, this is an entire code to cash team. We got engineers and we got our business systems analysts, and we had a TPM, a technical program manager, kind of running the show as a whole unit, which involved multiple teams together. And the idea was, let's split it down. Let's tackle new business. New business gives us a leverage of understanding. It has more, you have more room to make errors.
Right.
And not screw up existing business, which is also very data centric. So that was one. The second piece, then once we finished that off,
right,
we went to existing business. Now, existing business that was the challenging part, right? Because existing business, where it becomes challenging is your pricing models. How many pricing models do you want to support? How many can we support successfully? How back should we go? How should we populate the contracts who's responsible for uploading those contracts? responsible for collecting 6-7 years of data and then making sure that it can be uploaded into Salesforce successfully? Where does the source of truth lie? So those were the questions we asked during the second phase of saying, okay, one, where is the source of truth for all contracts? How do we make that into, in our instance, Salesforce? How do we make that the source of truth for all contracts moving forward? So I think there's moving parts to this is also trying to figure out how many deal types we support, what type of deal types we support, how do we support them? Do we support them end to end, not just from sales perspective, but as I said, billing and financial perspective as well. So there were 3 streams of work, I would say, in the next stage. One was very data centric, which was making sure our contracts and our contract data is clean. The second one was around our systems and our automation around CPQ, making sure they are as effective as possible. And the third one was around pricing and packaging, and making sure we have the right bundling, we have the right logic, we have the right pricing structures to be able to support all the changes that we wanted to make.
So in terms of change management, right, as you're going live and as you're looking to essentially make sure adoption is there, any strategies you plan to put in place? Because I think there is a certain test group that does the testing and the UAT, but then once it's rolled out, you always get a lot more requests. So how are you planning to make sure the adoption is really going to be a success here?
Yeah, we've been lucky at Intercom. Our adoption usually for new projects has been pretty good. And the way we think about adoption is in 2 fronts. Like you can build it, but if you don't communicate with your stakeholders and the folks that are going to be affected by it, and you don't involve them in the process, once you roll it out, you're going to have a lot of requests. Let's say that is going to be the least of your worry. And then making sure they're happy. You're already behind, you're already reactive, to my point. What we do is we involve whoever's going to be involved, whoever's going to be affected early on during our design stages. So we start to get their ideas and saying, okay, what are you thinking about? How are you thinking about things? Tell us everything. We meet with sales ops leaders, we meet with the sales leaders themselves, we meet with finance leaders, we meet with engineering leaders to just get their glimpse. The other thing we also do during this phase is, in the initial phase, we start to draw a North Star, call it a doc. What does a North Star for this entire process and system look like? And that is where it becomes very critical for us to involve all these partners to get their ideas. We ask our CFOs, like, what are the different deal types we want to support in the future? What do we want to support now? I want to paint a full picture without building it out, of course, but paint a full picture of all the different elements and all the different things that need to go into the process. Once we have that, we break it down into different stages and saying, okay, we can deliver all of these in X amount of time, then will come the next stage, then will come the next stage, then will come the next stage. So when we talk about stage 1, let's say, once we've had the initial design sessions, we've talked about problems to be solved, we've kind of dug in deep, and we've kind of also dug in deep with the architecture. Once we start to get into closer and closer to the rollout stage, we start to get a champions group going. And the champions group is from the stakeholder team. We get the folks that are, let's say, MC, sales reps. And we try to get the most influential sales reps on different teams and say, hey, come help us figure out if you're building the right thing or not. So we get a champions pool from our global sales team. And they're the ones who kind of provide us with a really good lens. They're also the ones who have really strong opinions on how certain things should be working. They're very experienced sales reps in their own position. So they give us really good insight when we're starting to get to the final touches, which is great. Because then once we start to think about the rollout, I usually want to believe, but we get them involved in the rollout process as well. We work with them in setting up our documentation if we have to. We're like, okay, we'll build it up, but what will land really well for you and your team? The ideal stage for me, which we are going to get close to, is once we roll it out and once we're enabling it, we want these champions to sit in on that enablement session. We want the sales team, let's say in the case for CPQ, to see their fellow persons, like a fellow rep, just walking them through the entire process and saying, okay, this is why we've designed it. This is how we've designed A, B, and C here. Because once they hear it from their own team members' mouth, I think the adoption automatically picks up. They buy it more. So we kind of use that strategy in making sure we push it out, but we're not the ones who are trying to push certain things out. It should be coming from their own team members, especially when it's larger projects.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a great strategy. In fact, I think that's a big mistake because people tend to involve stakeholders very late, and then the North Star strategy of having that vision and using that to test and in fact prioritize is going to be really critical. So I'm glad that you guys are adopting that. Thank you. Now let's talk about 2020. Interesting year. I think in digital transformation, COVID probably was more of an enabler. Like, are there any projects that were probably left or put on hold due to COVID, or projects that actually got accelerated because of COVID? Like, how is 2021 versus 2020 looking, and like, is there a COVID factor in Intercom?
Um, I, to be honest, I'm actually surprised, but there was maybe one project or two on our end to make sure we have everything that we need for to support our teams internally during this stay-at-home situation, as well as other companies as well when they have issues as well, right? Because we help our customers be their support side. So we saw an increase in their side, so we want to make sure we can help them out as best as we can. Now, when it comes down to specific strategy or specific projects based on COVID, to be honest, the answer is no from my perspective. I don't think we took anything extraordinary because of COVID, or a particular project which was very focused on COVID. Because I think we were designed to work like, I'll be honest, my team was globally at that point.
Oh, wow. Already.
In Brunei, I had folks in South Africa, Australia, Dublin, San Francisco. So we were kind of designed to be global in certain aspects. So it didn't hit us that hard.
Right.
Of course, there's the mental aspect of it all, which is a completely different beast. And that is something we enacted. That is something my new boss, Rich Archibald, kind of really pushed it through, is saying, we are in this scenario, we are all working hard, and at times I think working extremely hard. So what we do is we have this, we give outside of your own PTO, we tell every folks on our team is like, hey, you have another week off in every quarter. You need to take that time off. You need to take that time out. You need to take that time out. And maybe that's the only extra thing that we've added during the COVID time, making sure people take more time off than they usually do.
We're almost at the end of our podcast, Jalal, and you've been really insightful. Thank you for being so open. For listeners who are starting their career, business analysts or software engineers, what would you recommend? Like, if they were to lead a business systems team, what should they be doing? How do they take up projects? Any recommendations for them?
Be curious. Ask questions. Ask a lot of questions. Be curious about every side. I think what the BSAs, at least in my own experience, is they tend to head towards the business side, gather that information, and start to kind of form their ideas. Engineers start to go back to their engineering roots and go, okay, we'll develop this. What I've seen success on both sides is when a BSA is kind of intrigued by, what are these engineering principles? How do we build this so it can last the test of time? What does that North Star look like? Is this good principles, or am I just executing? And on the other hand, engineers, really good engineers, in my opinion, really know the business inside out. They will ask the questions of saying, why is this important to you? Oh, you can't make $100 a day? Why is that important? Oh, you get paid out on that. Oh, got it. Okay, cool. How do we create that infrastructure as well? How do we monitor those things on an ongoing basis? So I think from both sides, it's understanding both sides of the principles of saying, okay, what are the engineering principles, and make sure I get them. But I also need to get the business, because this is one interesting cross section that I see where both engineering and business kind of collide. So having a good idea of how both of them run, of course, it's all a matter of how deep you want to go, but at least at the surface level, have that knowledge with you and saying, okay, I'm going to ask why. I want to ask why this person was extremely angry when I deployed something that broke something. And the answer usually is someone's commission or someone's quota was dependent on it. So I think having that empathy is super important in understanding your stakeholders, because if you deliver for your stakeholders, you will get the time to build like the long tier projects, is how I see it.
Awesome. Thank you, Jalal. This has been a pleasure to get to know you, Thanks for sharing your insights from your journey to some of the projects, to some of the best practices. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Protik. Appreciate it. It was fun.
So with that, I would like to wrap up this podcast. Thank you all for tuning into Reimagine Enterprise Sales Systems. To listen to more exciting podcasts, please visit my website, protikm.com or protikm.com, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, and other channels that you follow so that you'll never miss your show.